Hello, everybody. We're pleased to welcome you for Insight number 3, organized by EvalSDGs with cooperation with EvalGender Plus. During this dialogue, we will be discussing one of EvalSDGs guidance group insights, which is usually done by EvalSDGs on topics related to evaluation and SDGs. So it's pieces with information and knowledge regarding evaluation and SDGs, and you can access those insights through our website, evalsdgs.org. In order to make it a quick introduction, as you know, we are using Zoom platform for this dialogue. And if you're new to Zoom dialogue, we encourage you to introduce yourselves through the chat button. If you're accessing Zoom through computer, the chat button is shown below as in the slide. And if you're accessing this dialogue through your mobile, you can find the chat box through clicking on the 3 dots and for more, and then you will find the chat. So we encourage you to introduce yourselves for us in order to make it more dynamic and interactive. So the first part of the dialogue will be held by our moderator and our speakers. Then we will be opening it for a discussion, and the webinar will be recorded. For the initial stage, the microphones will be muted. Then we are open for your comments, questions, or any feedback you would like to share with us. I would like to introduce for you our moderator. Our moderator for this dialogue is Ravi Ram. Ravi is an evaluation and strategy professional with expertise in applying gender equity and social inclusion lens to development evaluations. He is based in Nairobi, and he contributes to the African Evaluation Association and the EvalSDGs guidance group. Ravi was a co-editor of the Insight, which will be discussed today. So the floor is yours, Ravi.
Thank you so much, Rowan, and very pleased to be with you all today. A big welcome to this third dialogue on the evaluation insights. And today we'll be looking at EI number 10, transforming monitoring and evaluation for achieving the SDGs and applying a gender lens. The link to that evaluation insight is on the evalsdgs.org website. I'm putting that into the chat right now. So you should see that in just a moment. And there we go. So you can click on that link. If you scroll to the very bottom of the web page, you'll find the EI number 10, and you can download it straight there. Very much encouraging all of you to have the evaluation insight with you. And today's dialogue will be a discussion among 4 of the authors of that evaluation insight, 2 each from the EvalSDGs group and EvalGender Plus. I think we've gone through a few housekeeping notes, so we'll just proceed right now. You can see on the screen the 4 authors who will be talking to us. There are 2 other authors. They're also on this call, and the other co-editor for the evaluation insight is also with us, and that's Diana. So Sonal Zaveri and Svetlana Negrostyeva from EvalGender Plus, Hayat Askar and Isha Miranda from EvalSDGs. We look forward to having a very rich discussion with all of these 4 authors very, very soon. As we get started, and as Rowan has said, we very much look forward to seeing your names and your countries popping up in the chat box. We'll do that as by way of introduction. And what we'll also encourage you to do is to add comments and discussions into the chat box. We also have the Q&A function enabled on the Zoom call. And you can use that for putting in questions so that we can target those when we come to the discussion phase. We'll be very much looking forward to a discussion phase once we've heard from our speakers and the authors of the evaluation insight. And I'll request each of the speakers to briefly introduce themselves as they begin to speak at each turn during the discussion. And you'll hear their names, their affiliation with the Eval partners, and just a bit on their professional work. So we see several names coming up right now about who's in our call today and which countries are coming from. Very much looking forward to that and keeping it coming. Let's move on to our first poll. And you'll see that popping up on your screens in just a moment. How are we doing, Katinka? Looking forward to having the poll.
Responses are coming in already. So as you can all see, the first question is how many SDGs are seen to be gender responsive? And so far we have one response that is winning, but we still look forward to some more to respond. We have 27 of you who responded.
Fantastic. Okay. I'm not actually seeing the poll on my screen, so I'm looking forward to it. But those of you who've heard the question, you can choose none, SDG 5 only, 7 SDGs, 17 SDGs, or 30 SDGs. Let's hear the responses very, very soon.
Okay, we will now end the poll. Thank you all for voting, and you should be able to see the results shortly. So in case you cannot see it, Ravi, we see that there is a winning response. Most of you, 43% of you, think that SDG 5 is the only SDG that is seen to be gender responsive.
All right, fantastic. And we'll be coming back to that in our discussions with the authors of the evaluation insight. Let's get to the second question then. What is a VNR?
The polling started, so please enter your responses. We already have 25 responses. Please keep voting. Okay, I will end the poll now. Thank you so much for having voted for this question. You should now be able to see the results on your screen. We have a winning response. 66% of you think that indeed VNR stands for Voluntary National Review.
All right, great. Our third question as we start our interactive dialogue, and this is a personal one, so it's not fact-based. How familiar are you with gender and equity responsive evaluations? And this is just to get a sense about who we are as a group together today. You can, if you don't have experience, please do say not at all. This is anonymous and nobody's going to come back to you on this. But we do want to get a sense of the range of experience that we have. So the poll is launched. Katinka. All right.
Yes, we have already 30 people of you who voted.
And let's hear the responses now.
"37 of you have voted, 39. Okay, and we will end the polling now. So we have again several responses actually coming forward. The one that is most selected is some experience, but not an expert. But there are also 30% of you who say heard of it, but don't have much experience. But 13% of you actually say I'm an expert.
Oh, that's fantastic to hear. So clearly all of us recognize that there is an importance and value to gender responsive and equity focused evaluations. Those of you who came out and said that you've heard of it but don't have much experience, let's hope we can add to that in our discussion today. We'll now turn to the authors of the evaluation insight, and I'll ask first for Hayat from EvalSDGs and Sonal from EvalGender Plus. Our first question will be, how and why is gender responsive evaluation important for the SDGs? And Hayat, could you give us your take on this? Let's go first.
Thanks, Ravi. So just to introduce myself, I'm Hayat Askar from Jordan. I'm from EvalSDGs Guidance Working Group. And I also am an M&E professional in a state organization and the vice president of Eval Jordan Association. So just like back to your question, the 2030 Agenda for the Sustainable Development Goals really calls for 3 universal values, and human rights, and the gender equality, and women rights, and the leaving no one behind. And I would like to zoom in on the leave no one behind, mainly in particular. The SDGs themselves is the what, thanks Katinka, and the leave no one behind really address the who. So we cannot consider the SDGs as being met unless it's met for everyone and without leaving anyone behind us. But how could we do that? How could we do really where we are in terms of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and how could we know the progress in terms of that? We need evidence, and this is really where the role of evaluation comes. What do you think, Sonal?
Thanks a lot, Hayat, for introducing this. To talk a bit about myself, I am the co-chair of EvalGender Plus, and also the founder of the Gender and Equity Network South Asia, and also the founder of Community of Evaluators South Asia. I live in India. Just to follow up on what you mentioned, Hayat, yes, gender responsive evaluation is critically important for all SDGs. And there's absolutely no doubt that we live in a gender unequal world, and that we have a huge gender gap that's not going to be closed even by 2030. So I think we all recognize that gender inequality is not only very widespread, but it's also a very sticky form of inequality. And it's very complex because it intersects with race, with class, with ethnicity, sexual orientation, disability, and a host of other social cleavages. And so unless we mainstream gender across all SDGs, it's absolutely unlikely that we are going to achieve the leave no one behind principle, which, as Hayat mentioned, is the central theme of the SDGs. In fact, the Beijing conference in 1995 stated at that time that the principal global strategy to fight gender inequality is gender mainstreaming. And that's what we are discussing today. So how do we do that? Well, if you could go to the next slide. Well, first we have to remember that we have to be intentional to explore the why. The structural systemic inequalities, the power relationships that enable the inequalities to exist. And so as evaluators, we need to build a gender lens when we plan, when we prepare, conduct, report, and especially when we facilitate the use and the follow-up. And so the methods that we use should go beyond the sex disaggregation of data. Next slide, please. Beyond just describing the inequities and to ask the difficult questions that we have for transformative change. So we are looking at mixed methods, gender-sensitive frameworks. They're truly useful for evidence gathering when we want to talk about, describe, and to challenge the power inequities. And I think if we frame our evaluations in this way, we are most likely to reduce gender inequalities. So I think as evaluators, we play such an important role to ensure gender and equity transformative change for all the SDGs. Over to you, Ravi.
Thank you so much, Sonal and Hayat. That's a great introduction to where we are. And as we go to our next set of speakers, I'll encourage everybody with the evaluation insight, take a look at the box that shows a breakdown of how the SDGs have been classified in terms of their gender responsiveness. We know that the preparation, design, and implementation of all 17 SDGs in all countries needs to integrate a gender perspective. Let's hear, where are we now? And I'll turn first to Sonal, if you can pick it up, and then we'll hear from Isha as well, from EvalSDGs.
Thank you. I think now that we, agree that gender and equity are relevant to each and every SDG, and not just confined to SDG 5, as we've also seen the poll. So before I take a deep dive into how gender is integrated into the SDGs, I just wanted to go through the gender continuum, which is probably familiar to many of you. May I have the next slide, please? So the continuum provides a very easy way to identify how gender sensitive the 17 SDGs are. So you could be gender negative, gender blind, which has absolutely no attention to gender, targeted, where more about the number of women and men participating, or it could be gender responsive, where you describe the inequalities, but it's only when you come to gender transformative that you challenge the structural inequities and the power relationships. So moving on to looking at the 17 goals, may we have the next slide? Here you have a pictorial, and we can see that gender responsive SDGs, just 6 out of the 17. 4 are gender sparse with very few indicators, and quite a few are just gender blind, almost 7 of them. And when we look at the gender responsive SDGs, except for number 5, where we have all indicators, you look at number 1, no poverty, just 5 out of 14. Health, 6 out of 27. When we're looking at decent work, 6 out of 17. So we can see that even where we have gender responsive SDGs, there are few indicators among the others that respond to gender transformation. Looking at gender sparse, 0 hunger, SDG 2, only 2 out of 13. Number 10, which is so closely linked with gender inequalities, only 1 out of 11 is gender specific. And then, of course, when we move to the gender blind, we are looking at clean water, energy, industry, production, partnership. All of them don't have a single indicator for the any of these SDGs. So I think this description provides us a reality check as evaluators. We need to be aware of what are our challenges that are really inherent when we evaluate gender and equity in the SDGs. But it's also an opportunity for us to advocate for more gender sensitive indicators, whether we are doing evaluations, commissioning them, or working with decision makers. And I think if we know the gaps, we can surely address them. May I ask? Yeah, thanks, Ravi.
Yeah, thanks very much, Sonal. That's great. Isha is going to give us another look at the same data, and she's going to do it from the EvalSDGs perspective. Isha, can you give the audience a brief introduction, and then let's hear your take on the analysis of the SDGs.
Aisha, you are muted.
Isha, you need to unmute.
Sorry. Okay, can you hear me again?
Yes, we got you now. Great.
Yes. I'm Isha Miranda, and I'm an evaluator, and I'm also a member of the Evaluating Association of Sri Lanka. I live in Sri Lanka. Let me significantly challenges that the member countries face. The evaluation I had done with the member countries VNR, especially Asia Pacific. There are 6 areas they are finding very difficult to understand, unclear on the concept of gender mainstreaming. The another one is they were clear about the technicalities, who should be, who shouldn't be in the gender mainstreaming. The other area they are talking about the coordination, the weak coordination. The VNR report indicated weak coordination, monitoring mechanism, even to indicate this gender mainstreaming. And most probably breadth of evaluation, evidence-based diet program was not in the measuring system evaluation in the gender. Issue is the resources, inadequate human, technical, financial investment, especially on all levels on the gender equality programs. Insufficient data, lack of centralized data on the countries are showing the gender. And also limited attention, neglect to the groups and issues of the neglected group by this vulnerability. So given that information, given that challenges faced by the member countries, I think we should be focused on 3 areas. I just take 3 areas. SDG 5 itself should be focused on gender equality instead of the woman and the girl child. Other priorities, the gender issues adequately measured, analyzed into other SDGs. And priority should be given to fill the gap in the current missing respective targets on gender. If you do that as a United Nations, as a SDG committee, then the member countries also will fall onto the right place. Thank you. Over to Ravi.
Thank you very much, both of you. And just to address a question that's been coming up on the chat, many of you have been asking about access to the presentation that's going on right now and to the webinar recording later on. We will be happy to share those with you. That will be on the EvalSDGs website, and we'll send out further information when that is available. What I'd like to do now is address the question that came up about what is a VNR, and we'll hear from 3 of the authors of the Evaluation Insights on that topic. So specifically, I'd like to hear from Svetlana of EvalGender Plus, and then Isha and Hayat again. What have we learned about gender responsiveness in national reviews of the SDGs? And Svetlana, can you take us forward right now? You're also on mute. There you go.
Yes, and this next slide, please, for me to take it forward. Thank you, everyone. There is a poll. Are we doing a poll now?
Yeah, let's do that. Let's go to the Mentimeter poll. Katinka, you'll take us there.
Yes. So Roxana will put the link to the Mentimeter poll in the chat, and we will look at together in live at the results. So you can see now in the chat box the Mentimeter, and we will also see it on the screen. So please go to menti.com and enter the code that is written here, 60023956. And please indicate who you think is responsible for integrating gender into the evaluations of the SDGs.
Thanks, Katinka. And just a quick note to everybody, try to keep this short. We want to see just 1 or 2 words per response, but you have 3 responses that you can provide. Don't say everyone, we know that. Let's think who specifically can we target on this.
So responses are coming in. Thank you so much.
Clearly, we're putting governments and evaluators at the center of responsibility.
Okay, we have 22 of you who have voted already.
And we also have some people who are putting additional contributions into the chat, which is fantastic. Okay, Katinka, how are we doing?
We had 26 votes, so I think that's good enough. 28 now. Oh, you heard me.
I can see more coming in, yes.
I think the answers are quite clear, with evaluators, government, and policymakers really standing out.
Very much, yes. All right. And as we said before, we will also share the outcomes from this word cloud with the larger group. So now let's turn to Svetlana. Let's get the question back on the screen. What have we learned about gender responsiveness in national reviews of the SDGs? And let's take a look at what evidence from the VNRs can tell us. Over to you, Svetlana.
Thank you, Katinka. Thank you, Ravi. And good day, evening, morning, colleagues. My name is Svetlana Negrostoeva. I am outgoing chair of EvalGender Plus, and I was a former chair of the Feminist Issues and Evaluation TIC and the American Evaluation Association. And I'm extremely excited to be here today. And it's actually a good segue from the poll that was done before, because a lot of really good words popped up there that we also looked at when we looked at the VNRs with our partners in EvalSDG. In 2018, 2019, we conducted reviews of the voluntary national review reports from countries using the framework that was adapted from the one that was used by EvalSDGs in earlier reviews of VNR reports for integration of evaluation in VNRs. However, we took it further to look at the gender aspects. And what you see on your slide is the parameters that we looked at. Those were around the keywords, and that was important as a start. And there was some really good findings. The reference to governance system of the SDG, measuring SDG processes and methodological frameworks for those. Of course, evaluation into SDGs and review systems, how those are integrated. And we paid special attention to national frameworks and strategies and policies that address gender and how those were referenced in the VNR reports. The evidence of inclusion of marginalized voices, that is to respond to the principle of leaving no one behind, was specifically looked at, and interesting findings and showing the wide range of those voices globally were shown. And of course, the plans for continuous review of SDG progress up to 2030 and through with civil society organizations, of which BOPIs are an important actor. So for the next slide, it just gives you a snapshot of the number of VNR reports that we looked at. The next slide, is it going? Thank you. We looked at 66 reports across 2 years, and you see the kind of the colors wise that they were the relatively representative picture globally. So we can proceed, thank you. And as far as findings, there are some findings that are presented in the inside document from EvalSDG and EvalGender Plus, and we also had other publications around this very important learnings. This first screen shows just a couple of parameters that I mentioned before and those generic findings. For example, on the keyword search, how diverse and not consistent the terminology is in those reports, and where they were. For example, there was a lot of focus on executive summaries and tables and figures, but not a lot in the actual bodies of the reports. And of course, there are the terminology related aspects of social inclusion, social participation. A lot of them seem to be in very different ways addressed and not consistently. And such issues as LGBTQ, for example, were not addressed pretty much in none of the reports that we looked. Governance was also interesting to look at, and there was a wide range of governance structures around SDG monitoring, and very few of them included gender machineries or, for example, VOPIs. So that was a big finding. The strategies, we looked at where the Beijing Platform of Action or CETA agreements were mentioned. And again, these were not many, but where they were mentioned in relationship to SDG 5 only, and not recognizing it as a cross-cutting issue. And one very important one, of course, is the no one left behind principle that took a very strong focus in those reviews. And there we found the diversity, a wide range of context-specific groups that were that varied by country. For example, in, I think, Romania, there were gypsies, and in other countries, there were refugees. So the recognition of those groups as marginalized was really notable across the reports. And on the next slide, which I'm just going to run really fast through, basically the next set of parameters are explored. But most important findings here were that evaluations were not often referenced, and especially evaluations that were gender responsive were not referenced, significantly. And statistical offices were leading often the processes and were designed to lead them further, because for many of the reports that we looked, those were the first reports, and we know from those processes that there would be a second and the third report usually. So we can proceed to the next slide, because this just gives you kind of snapshots. For example, this was really one big set of indicators that we compared across the two cohorts. And we can see that there was overall improvement in how and what was covered. However, mind you that, of course, they were not the same countries in 2018 or 2019. So it's just kind of globally, there was more recognition or more attention or more capacity building around that by those who are involved in these processes. And often they were UN colleagues. UNICEF was heavily involved, UNDP was heavily involved in those processes, so that you can see reflected in the improvements. And the last slide for me, and I'll welcome any questions afterwards, is around where you can find additional information with more detail. We did a regional studies focus on Africa in the African Development Bank Evaluation Journal, in the EES, and some other publications. And I will include the links to the brief itself in the chat box. Thank you, everyone.
That's fantastic, Svetlana. Very good. Now we do want to hear a little bit more about the VNRs, and then perhaps Isha can tell us something about the perspective from the Asia region, and Hayat will talk about the Middle East, North Africa region. Isha? Need to unmute, Isha.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, my presentation is actually, I'm just trying to show how the HLPS SDG country reporting was focusing on this gender. If you take the red colors, you can see in 2017, they focused SDG 5 only once up to now. Then the SDG 10 has been focused 3 times of the year. And then, of course, which is including 2021 upcoming one, and SDG 17 has been focused 4 times. So there is something the countries need to be thinking about. The SDG 5 cannot say only one. I think HLP should consider about the VNR reporting SDG 5 every year. So there is a prospect of the gender equality can be discussed and the countries can be focused on more, emphasized more strongly. Next slide, please. Please, next slide. The methods and approach should be embedded. This is what I'm thinking, proposing that if we want to get the gender mainstreaming into our culture, system has to be strengthened in all levels. Complexities existed, mitigation at all levels in these issues to come out with the gender equality. Then the feminist theory approaches needed balanced approach, gender as a whole, not only women and girls. Then there has to have a participatory approach and governance to civil society in order to be able to achieve this gender equality. And systematic assessment and evaluation should integrate. In other words, create a culture, which is Hyatt has always said, we must change. Evaluation can make a change maker. So I think I like to stop from there to hand over to Hyatt. And Hyatt, for you.
Thank you, Aisha. Thank you. So I don't have much to add to what Svetlana and Aisha really presented. This was really very comprehensive. I just want to mention one thing, and I was happy to see the VOPE word, which is the Voluntary Organization for Evaluation or National Evaluation, in the word cloud. I took part in the VNR review the first time it was done for some MENA regions, reviewing a couple of countries in the MENA region. And not surprisingly, as Svetlana mentioned, the civil society, including VOBEs, had very limited role. And we could see it. I'm coming from a VOBE from Jordan, and I can see that we are hardly part of SDGs discussions or VNR's planning or implementation. We have more than 45 international organizations who are really focused on evaluation, and we need to have these in the discussion. And I don't know if you have ever played the ladder and the snake game, but I did. I'm still playing it. We will not be able to reach the up of the ladder without having both evaluation, without having the evaluation and as part of this, the VNR review. Of course, putting with the gender lens in front of us. Thank you. Over to you, Ravi.
Thank you very much, Hyatt. And thanks to all of our speakers. I am going to go back to the authors who've spoken today and just get a last take from them about what their quick recommendations would be. Just before we do so, I'm very much encouraging everybody to add comments and questions into the chat box. I'm very much agreeing with Diana's point. A lot of diversity here. I think we have every continent on this webinar except for Australia, and no doubt they are asleep at this moment. So do be thinking of your questions and comments. I saw a previous one from John bringing up the issues about equity and equality. But as we get those comments in, let's turn to each of our authors who are speaking today. I'm going to ask Svetlana first, and then Isha, Sonal, and we'll conclude with Hyatt, giving you about 30 seconds to give your solid recommendation about what we can take away. Over to you, Svetlana.
Thank you. 30 seconds for solid recommendations is not enough, but I will try. So you can find a lot of them already written and embedded in the insight that we developed with our colleagues from EvalSDGs. And I posted links to regional and the actual guide, the actual brief that came out in 2018. But from kind of my personal and additional and plea maybe is, as Hyatt also said, is the involvement of VOPEs in these processes. VOPEs as civil society actors that do bring the voices of actually so many in the societies, and that does vary by country because the VOPEs membership consists of government representatives, civil society representatives, M&E professionals and private sector M&E professionals. So in terms of coverage that it provides, it also helps and the evidence that they can bring, the methods that evaluators can bring through the VOPIs, and the power, cumulative power for advocacy, for use of evidence in those processes, I think is really important. So VOPIs are civil society and use of evidence for advocacy. That would be my solid recommendation.
There we go. We took a minute to get to the 30 seconds, but thanks very much, Svetlana.
Double is good.
All right. Isha, can you give your top of the mind insights?
Yeah, 30 seconds. We all actors. I think we have invested enough in climate action, enough. But why not we all actors get together invest in same for gender too? It's a vital important. And the world is focusing only on climate action. Gender is also vital. I think we should go for it. That's my last word.
Great, thank you, Isha. Sonal, can you add in your
30
$2?
seconds.
Yes.
Yeah, well, I think gender and equity has become very visible in terms of the demand for such evaluations. So I look forward to increasing the supply, the capacity building of our monitoring and evaluation professionals in gender and equity responsive evaluations. And I think the poll that we had right at the beginning indicated that there is a gap in building these capacities related to gender and equity. So I would go for that.
Mm-hmm. Very good. And Hayat, let's hear from you.
I will speak about what really Aisha referred to, and that is we as evaluators have really an important role. However, small or big the initiatives or the projects we are working with, we should put the SDGs in front of us. We are contributing to SDGs, and we should have our gender lens to get more understanding on gender and try to make a change from our sides. I hear that from many other people as well, and they believe we are change makers and change agents, and we should really do a change.
Mm-hmm. All right. And that came up in the poll as well, didn't it? When we saw evaluation as a key force for action on gender in the SDGs. Okay. You've heard from the authors of the evaluation insight. We've had a very rich discussion. Let's hear from you. John has just put on a question, and I'll read it out. Katinka, you can advise us. Is it possible to promote John to a speaker so that we can hear from him directly? But reading this out, there are 169 targets in the SDGs, most of which do not have completely agreed indicators, and evaluations can provide much of the missing data, especially dealing with gender, since at the UN system level, gender is supposed to be included in all evaluations. And so that's drawing very much on the work of the UN evaluation group. John, if you're able to speak right now, can you elaborate on this and tell us what's the challenge that we need to take on as evaluators?
Well, this is something that I learned about a little. I learned a lot about gender. I used to be the deputy director of the Division for the Advancement of Women in the UN before we had age discrimination. You know how that happens. But one of the things that was very clear in the SDGs, we don't worry too much about the SDGs. We mostly worry about the 169 targets. Keep that in mind. And there is a system in place. Everyone should remember that the statistical office basically says you're either tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3 indicators for each of these targets. The tier 1 ones, hey, no problem, that's census and whatnot. But most of the things that we're interested in, there is no agreed indicator, and data is not consistently collected by governments. Now, the point is you can use evaluations as your way of bringing that data to bear. The example I used is the use of gender. It's supposed to be an all UN system evaluations at the project and program level. The answer of whether it is or not is kind of uneven. Frankly, I'm involved with looking at the evaluation quality assessment of UNICEF evaluations, and they do about 140 a year. And they do a pretty good job of getting that data into their evaluations. The next question is, how do you get that data from those evaluations into the national reporting? And I think that's the issue that one has to push.
Thank you. I think that's the issue.
Oh, great, John. Thanks so much. Yes. Can we have some reactions from others on the webinar? These are very important issues that we are filling in a lot of the gaps that the UN system has laid out, but not fully addressed.
You know, I think John's, very thoughtful comments. I think we still are stuck in many ways in just disaggregating data. And in our talk, we say gender transformative. But in a lot of what we do is merely disaggregating. At the most, we target, and we assume that by targeting, we are going to become gender transformative. So I think in theory and in practice, there's really a big gap. And I think walking that talk is going to be challenging, but it's also an opportunity for us to move forward.
I think I also like to add, John, because John spoke about what I was sort of keen on, the data centralized. So the data is all over, as Sonal said, and so the national government cannot go into to come into the system where the gender, what data to take and what are the issues. So I think John will write on that, Sonal will write on that. But as he said, as Sonal said, evaluation can bring these actors, these pieces together. But the issue is, John, evaluation also has these parameters that we have to stuck to the TOR, and we have to act accordingly. And that TOR also, I think, needs some changes. So then the evaluator has a room to do the evaluation that we have to do, or as it comes. So I think we have these two challenges need to be addressed. Thanks, John and Sonal.
And
Yeah,
Ravi, if I have, if I have this to say, I was part of different projects with different donors, and there's always the evaluators. Most of the time, they are asked to do the gender work without being sure that they have the knowledge or they have the full knowledge about that work, and then without putting most of emphasis, and then we end with this aggregation of data. I think countries are working towards evaluation policies. You need to have something institutionalized, or in order to come from the the high level from the countries, and to make it important and mandatory to update the information. It's not easy. It's, of course, most of the data we look at in different countries are maybe outdated, and we build a lot of decisions on them. So this needs a lot of cooperation, but it comes from the higher level, which make it mandatory to share the results of different evaluations at the national level.
Thanks, Hayat. Yes. And I'm seeing points from Svetlana as well as Laura. I'd like to see if we can get Laura able to speak as well. And as we do that, perhaps we can hear from Svetlana. You had a very interesting point as well.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Let's go ahead. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, thank you so much for the great presentations. Very interesting. I just had a couple of comments. So one is that to me, I think that gender equality as a topic is very clear to, developmental practitioners, experts, evaluators. But being in the US, I realized that the general public is very much confused about it. So they interpret it as a feminist movement, and it's wrong. So I think I would really, it would be like, my vision would be that probably your networks, evaluators could do something to educate more the general public. And another point is also pushing a little bit the concept of women in security and peace building. I think that there is still a little bit of room on that front, as we know. I mean, in 2000, like a Security Council Resolution 1325 was approved, and I mean, there has been lots of progress since that time. But yeah, I mean, being passionate about both topics, I wish there could be like more room for women on that front. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Laura. And I think that's adding a bit about the public awareness and appreciation for integrating gender and equity perspectives, adding to Hayat's points about institutions and leadership. Svetlana, you had the point about the shadow reports, and I know that's been talked about quite a bit, and how much can they be factored in? And then the key question is, even if there is a shadow report, how can we make sure that it comes to the attention of member states? But let's hear your perspective on those shadow reports.
Well, I think this, I'm not an expert in the shadow reports, but I think that given, my earlier point on the role of VOPIS, and, some of you did click that when you did the Mentimeter, given that, again, VOPIS are part of civil society and they have a multifaceted composition, they have different strings that they can pull in government, in civil society. And shadow reports do get enough, actually, publicity. So integrating in those processes could be one way to do that, because they are actually evidence-based. They do come out with loud fanfares very often, and being represented by strong civil society movements, which are national, regional, and integrating in those processes and helping them by providing evidence from evaluations can strengthen those reports, but also can bring evaluation into the higher and brighter light. I think that would be one of the ideas, but of course there are many other ways that evaluators and VOPIS, the VOPIS as organizations, even formal or informal, they're much stronger than individual evaluators. So that, I think, has to be recognized, and VOPIS can be strengthened to become such advocates. Thank you.
Right. And John's adding in the points also that it's not just about quotas, but it's involvement of all people and all sectors or genders in decision-making. So I think that's a very important contribution. I know among our participants, we have representatives from the African Gender Development Evaluators Network, as well as the Gender Evaluation Network of South Asia. So these are two very important Global South networks. Florence is a key member of AGDEN in Africa. Perhaps we could hear from her right now.
Can you hear me okay?
We hear you, Florence, yes.
Great, thank you very much. I'd like to thank the presenters. It's interesting to see this coming to light in this really interactive manner. I just wanted to add in relation to strategies that are required. I think about, I'm not sure if it was even up to 3 weeks ago, as Elena tell me, the Eval Forward webinar, is it up to 3 weeks ago? No.
Yes, 3 weeks ago, first in the series, they will be.
Good, good. At that seminar, at that webinar, what struck me was the fact that people are still confused about how to do gender responsive or gender transformative evaluations. That came out very clearly. I remember Fabiola was mentioning that. So I think in relation to what needs to happen for all of us, especially, I also noticed in the poll that the number of experts was exactly equivalent to the number of people who had no idea about what gender responsive evaluation is all about. So we are equally advantaged and disadvantaged. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done in relation to actually skilling people out there, those who know about gender equality and equity. Those who want to do gender equality and equity work don't know how to proceed. So we have a lot of work to actually spread the capacities and skills for doing gender responsive evaluation. Just as an analysis, John has said, gender is supposed to be in all evaluations. And of course, we have the great tools that the UN has done this, but in most evaluations, either they ask in the approach, but when it comes to the questions, they are dissipated, they vaporize. So there's a real issue about skills for doing evaluations that are gender responsive and gender transformative. I just wanted to put that down there, that it's a work that needs doing. Thank you very much. And thanks again for this interesting webinar dialogue.
So thanks a lot for that. And just to chip in that in the Global South, we have started the Gender and Equity Network South Asia, GENSA. And if you go to gensanetwork.org, you can see some of the work. And it was precisely made, developed because we realized that there was a huge gap in the supply of evaluation professionals that are competent for gender and equity related evaluations. And the demand for skill building is really very high. And what we've noticed is that people from the Global South want more practical tools, things that they could use immediately, and less of the theoretical orientation that one finds in, perhaps some of the resources. So how to translate those resources into practice is a huge demand. And I think we have been successfully running every 2 months, and we continue to be having, more and more requests for increasing the number of sessions that we have on skill building, providing these practical solutions. So I think if we are able to, expand our expertise among our evaluators, we would be able to actually get more people to engage in addressing some of the gaps in the SDGs and to build these partnerships with, with the government, with, commissioners and so on.
Thank you, Sonal. And as we start winding up, we've got about 1 minute left. I want to encourage people to click on the links. Katinka and Svetlana have been very, very proactive in giving us resources online. I'm also just reiterating the EvalGender Plus and EvalSDGs websites right now. Let's make sure we get those. And Svetlana has also shared with us the YouTube link so that those of you who have not been able to access the or don't have a continuous internet, you can definitely download or tag that YouTube file so you can follow up later. Really, really interesting points. Yes, Isha, you'd like to say something.
Can you take a group photo and say, can you do that? No.
Okay, let's try that. Yes, I know everybody's conserving their bandwidth, but if you can put on your video for just a moment, and then we'll do some quick screenshots to capture all of us as we are at the end of the webinar. Seeing a lot of people coming on right now. That's great. All right, and we'll be able to pick this up from the recording, but nevertheless, I'm also doing a screenshot right now. Great. That's an excellent idea, Isha. Thanks so much. Now, I think we should, we'll be wrapping up in just a moment. Any last final words from our speakers today?
If I'm starting, I think we have a big responsibility to educate our stakeholders on gender mainstreaming. And that is what Sonal talking about, this capacity. I think we need to take this forward. I believe that people like Florence and everybody, or the evaluation, everybody who is audience, who are listeners or who are participating, this, we have a responsibility as evaluators to bring this gender mainstreaming into the forefront. I think that's my answer, and we should be doing it.
Thanks, Isha. Svetlana?
I think that I would love to hear from others more than I would like to talk myself. And I think the sharing of the resources is one of the ways to, for me to give my last words. Join in the movement.
Great, well said. Sonal?
Well, I just want to thank all the people that are present here today who have stayed on for the entire 1 hour. And thank you so much for being here today.
All right, and Hayat.
And I would like also to build on that such meetings and such discussions, I think, is much needed in order to learn from all these experiences. And it all starts with small steps. So whatever we do, it builds on. Hopefully we can come up a bit far. Thank you.
All right, yes, that's fantastic. I'd like to acknowledge the authors of this evaluation insight, and that's from EvalGender Plus, Florencia Sonal Svetlana, and from EvalSDGs, Florence Etta, Hayat, and Isha. Diana Davis-Smith and I were the co-editors. We are very, very pleased to see this work coming forward, and really, 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 really pleased with the discussion that's taken place today. So I'd like to thank everybody once again, wishing you a very good day, and let's see how we take this forward. Wishing you the best. Take care then. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Ravi and the team. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Ravi, everybody.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.